Picture yourself standing in moonlight thousands of years ago. The air smells of jasmine and wet stone. Somewhere in the ancient world, water flows upward. Gardens bloom in the desert. Kings whisper secrets to the stars. Long before our cities, before our roads, before our clocks, people built wonders that touched the sky. They carved stories into clay. They counted days by the river's breath. Tonight, we walk together through one of history's gentlest mysteries, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Did they exist? What did they hold? Why do they call to us across so many silent centuries? Close your eyes. Breathe slowly. Let the past unfold like petals in warm night air. This is your story. This is our shared dream. First light on ancient clay. Long ago, beside a river that bent like a snake, a city was born. The river was called Euphrates. It flowed slow and brown through flat desert land. People came to its banks. They drank the water. They watched fish swim in the shallows. They felt the mud between their toes. This mud was special. It was soft and smooth. When the sun dried it, the mud became hard as stone. Someone long ago had a wonderful idea. They pressed their thumb into wet mud. The mark stayed. They pressed again, making shapes. These shapes became the first words. This was how Babylon began, not with palaces or gardens, but with mud, water, and human hands. The first people built simple homes from river clay. They stacked mud bricks in the hot sun. The bricks baked until they were strong. Families lived in these small houses. They grew grain in fields beside the water. The Euphrates gave them everything. It gave them fish to eat. It gave them reeds for baskets. It gave them mud for building. The river rose and fell with the seasons. When it rose, the fields flooded with rich, dark soil. When it fell, farmers planted seeds. This rhythm was life itself. The people learned to watch the river like a friend. They learned its moods. They learned when it would be gentle and when it would be wild. Years passed, like clouds across the sky. The small village grew. More families came. They built more houses. They dug canals to bring river water to distant fields. These canals were the first engineering in Babylon, simple ditches carved by hand. But they changed everything. Now crops could grow far from the river. The village became a town. The town needed leaders. Strong men became the first chiefs. They decided when to plant. They decided how to share water. They settled arguments between neighbors. These chiefs built the first temple. It was just a raised platform of mud brick, but it pointed toward the sky. It said that humans wanted to reach something higher than themselves. On this platform, priests climbed at dawn. They watched the sun rise over flat desert. They made offerings of grain and oil. They asked the gods for rain and good harvests. The gods lived in the sky, they believed. The earth was the domain of humans, but the two realms could touch. They could speak to each other. The temple was that meeting place. As decades turned to centuries, the temple grew taller. Layer upon layer of brick were added. It became a step pyramid, reaching upward. This was the beginning of the ziggurat. These towers would one day define Babylon's skyline. But in those early days, it was just mud and hope and human hands reaching for something beyond the horizon. Writing became more complex. The simple thumb marks became elaborate symbols. Scribes trained for years to master them. They pressed wedge-shaped reeds into soft clay tablets. These marks were called cuneiform. It means wedge-shaped. With these marks, people could record everything. They wrote down how much grain was stored. They wrote down laws. They wrote down stories of gods and heroes. They wrote down the king's commands. These clay tablets did not rot like papyrus. They did not burn like paper. When buildings collapsed, the tablets were buried and baked by fire. This made them even harder. Thousands of years later, archaeologists would find these tablets. The voices of ancient Babylon would speak again through broken clay. The river continued its eternal flow. Generations were born and died beside its banks. Children played in the same mud their grandparents had known. The city grew slowly, patiently, like a tree adding rings. No one knew that one day Babylon would become the greatest city in the world. No one knew that gardens would hang from terraces high above this very ground. No one knew that kings would rule empires from here. But the seeds were planted in that ancient mud. Every great thing starts small. Every wonder begins with simple hands doing simple work. Babylon's story was just beginning. And tonight, we are here to listen to that story as the moonlight falls on ancient clay. Cities that whispered to the moon, the priests climbed stone steps in darkness. They climbed before the sun woke. Their robes swept the dust behind them. They carried clay tablets and bronze tools. They climbed to the top of the ziggurat. This tall tower rose above all the houses. From its top, they could see the whole world. Or so it seemed. The desert stretched in every direction. The river curved like a silver thread. And above, the stars were scattered like seeds across black soil. The priests came here to read the sky. They believed the gods wrote messages in starlight. Every night, the stars moved in patterns. These patterns told stories. They told when to plant. They told when to expect floods. They told the future. Babylonian priests were the first scientists. They did not call themselves that. They thought they were servants of gods. But what they did was science. They watched the same stars every night. They wrote down what they saw. They noticed that some lights in the sky moved while others stayed still. The moving lights were planets. The priests gave them names. They tracked their paths across the heaven. They discovered that these paths repeated. The moon grew full and then dark in a cycle that never changed. This cycle became the first calendar. Months were measured by the moon. Years were measured by the stars. Time itself was born from watching the night sky. The ziggurat was not just a tower. It was a cosmic map built in brick. Each level represented a different realm. The bottom was Earth, where humans lived. The middle levels were the air and clouds. The top was heaven, where gods dwelled. To climb the ziggurat was to climb from earth to heaven. It was a physical journey that mirrored a spiritual one. The priests painted each level a different color. The bottom was black for the dark earth. The middle levels were red, blue, and yellow. The top was covered in gold. When sunlight hit the golden peak, it blazed like a fallen star. People in the fields below would stop and stare. The ziggurat connected them to something vast and eternal. On certain nights, the priests performed rituals under moonlight. They burned incense that smelled of cedar and myrrh. The smoke rose in thin columns toward the stars. They chanted prayers in ancient language. These prayers asked for protection. They asked for wisdom. They asked the moon to guide travelers safely home. The moon was sacred in Babylon. It was called Sin, or Nana. It ruled the night, just as the sun ruled the day. The crescent moon appeared on Babylonian flags and seals. It appeared in artwork and jewelry. Even kings wore the crescent moon on their crowns. The moon was reliable. It always returned. In a world full of uncertainty, the moon was a constant friend. The priests recorded everything they saw on clay tablets. They drew pictures of constellations. They wrote down the dates when planets appeared in certain positions. They predicted eclipses. An eclipse was when the moon or sun went dark during the day or night. This terrified ordinary people, but the priests could predict them years in advance. This made the priests powerful. They seemed to know the mind of heaven. Kings relied on them for advice. Before going to war, a king would ask the priests to read the stars. Before signing a treaty, he would wait for a favorable omen. The sky was consulted like a wise old counselor, and the ziggurat was the meeting place between earth and cosmos. Babylon learned to listen in the silence of night. The city understood that humans were part of something larger. The same laws that moved the stars also moved the rivers and seasons. Everything was connected. This cosmic awareness shaped how Babylonians built and lived. When they later created gardens, they would arrange them with the same attention to pattern and harmony. They would align paths with the cardinal directions. They would plant trees in mathematical precision. The gardens would be a heaven on earth, just as the ziggurat was a stairway to heaven. But that would come later. For now, the priests climbed in darkness, reading the ancient text written in light across the endless night, symbols carved in stone gates. There was a gate in Babylon that shone like the sky. It was called the Ishtar Gate. Ishtar was the goddess of love and war. She was powerful and beautiful. The gate was built to honor her. It was made of thousands of blue bricks, not ordinary bricks. These bricks were glazed with a special coating. The coating was made from ground minerals mixed with fire. When baked, it turned brilliant blue, deep blue like the color of twilight. The bricks were so smooth they reflected light. Walking through this gate was like walking through a piece of heaven brought to earth. On the blue walls, golden animals walked in rows. There were lions with open mouths. There were dragons with snake heads and eagle claws. There were bulls with curved horns. These animals were sacred. The lion belonged to Ishtar. The dragon belonged to Marduk, the chief god. The bull belonged to Adad, the storm god. Each animal was made from bricks, shaped and fitted together like puzzle pieces. The animals looked alive. Their muscles seemed to move. Their eyes seemed to watch. People who entered the gate felt both afraid and amazed. This was the point. The gate said that Babylon was protected by divine power. No enemy could conquer a city guarded by gods. King Nebuchadnezzar II built this gate. He ruled Babylon around the year 575 before the Common Era. This was the time when Babylon reached its greatest glory. Nebuchadnezzar was young when he became king. He was ambitious and proud. He wanted Babylon to be the most beautiful city in the world. He wanted visitors from distant lands to arrive and gasp in wonder. He wanted his name remembered forever. So he built. He built temples and palaces. He rebuilt the city walls, making them thicker and taller. And he built the Ishtar Gate as the grand entrance to the inner city. The gate was part of a longer road called the Processional Way. This road was wide and smooth. It was paved with limestone and redstone. On festival days, priests would lead sacred statues along this road. Thousands of people would line the sides, singing and throwing flowers. Musicians played drums and flutes. The sound echoed off the high walls. At the front of the procession, the statue of Marduk rode on a golden chariot pulled by priests. The statue was covered in jewels. Its eyes were made of precious stones. Behind it came other gods on smaller chariots. Behind them came the king himself, dressed in purple robes. This procession happened once a year during the New Year festival. It was the most important day in Babylon. The Ishtar Gate was not just art, it was a message. It told everyone who saw it that Babylon had mastered both beauty and power. The skill needed to create such glazed bricks was rare. Only Babylonian craftsmen knew the secret formulas. The blue glaze required cobalt, a rare mineral. It had to be mixed perfectly and fired at exactly the right temperature. Too hot, and it would crack. Too cool, and it would not shine. Each brick took days to make. Thousands of bricks meant years of work, but Nebuchadnezzar had the wealth and patience to complete it. This was the advantage of empire. Resources flowed to Babylon from conquered lands. Gold, silver, timber, and skilled workers all came as tribute. Today, pieces of the Ishtar Gate are in museums around the world. The Pergamon Museum in Berlin has a reconstructed section. Visitors stand before it and fall silent. Even now, separated from its original home, the gate holds power. The blue still glows. The golden lions still seem to prowl. It reminds us that beauty can survive empires. Long after kings are forgotten, their art remains. The Ishtar Gate whispered this truth. And those who later built the Hanging Gardens understood the same principle. They built not for a season, but for eternity. They built for the moonlight to remember. Objects left by quiet hands. Thousands of years passed. Cities crumbled. Walls fell. Palaces turned to dust. But small things survived. A clay bowl buried in sand. A bronze mirror dropped in a well. A cylinder seal lost in a merchant's home. These small objects tell us stories that grand monuments cannot. They tell us how ordinary people lived, not kings or priests, but potters and weavers, farmers and mothers, children who played with clay toys, merchants who measured grain. Their hands touched these objects. Their fingerprints are still pressed into ancient clay. When archaeologists find these things, they are touching the same surface a Babylonian touched 3,000 years ago. This is time travel made real. Clay bowls were everywhere in ancient Babylon. Every home had them. They held water, grain, dates, and oil. They were made on a potter's wheel. The potter would sit with wet clay spinning before him. He would shape the clay with his hands as it spun. His thumb would press the center, making it hollow. His fingers would pull the walls upward, making them thin and strong. When the bowl was shaped, he would set it in the sun to dry. Then he would fire it in a hot oven. The heat turned soft clay into hard pottery. Some potters decorated their bowls. They scratched patterns into the surface. They painted simple designs with natural dyes. Each bowl was unique because it was made by hand. Bronze mirrors showed a different kind of wealth. Bronze was expensive. It was made by mixing copper and tin. Both metals had to be imported from distant lands. A bronze mirror meant you had money. It meant you cared about appearance. Babylonian women would polish these mirrors until they shone like water. They would look at their faces in the smooth surface. They would arrange their hair and apply kohl around their eyes. Kohl was black powder made from ground minerals. It protected eyes from the harsh desert sun. It also made eyes look larger and more beautiful. These mirrors were often buried with their owners. People believed you would need your possessions in the afterlife, so graves contained mirrors, jewelry, and favorite bowls. Cylinder seals were perhaps the most personal objects. These were small stone cylinders carved with images and writing. Each person had their own unique seal. It was like a signature. When you rolled the seal across wet clay, it left an impression. This impression proved a document was authentic. Merchants used seals to mark goods. Officials used seals on legal documents. Even ordinary people had simple seals. The carvings showed animals, gods, or geometric patterns. Some showed scenes from myths. A hero fighting a lion, a goddess with wings, a tree of life with branches reaching to heaven. These tiny objects were carved with incredible detail. The artists used bronze tools finer than needles. They worked under strong sunlight, squinting at stone the size of a thumb. Children played with toys made from the same clay used for tablets. Archaeologists have found small clay animals, horses with wheels for legs, dogs with movable jaws, dolls with painted faces. These toys tell us that childhood in Babylon was not so different from childhood today. Children played. They imagined stories. They made their toys talk to each other. Parents made these toys for their children out of love. They carved them carefully. They painted them brightly. When a child outgrew a toy, it might be thrown away or lost. But the dry climate preserved them, and now we can see them in museums and imagine the laughter they once inspired. Every object holds a human moment. The bowl held someone's dinner. The mirror reflected someone's smile. The seal pressed someone's name into history. The toy comforted someone's child. These people are gone. Their names are mostly forgotten. But their hands left marks. Those marks say we were here. We lived. We worked. We loved. We mattered. This is the power of archaeology. It gives voice to the voiceless, and among all these objects we find hints of gardens, seeds preserved in jars, pollen grains trapped in pottery, tools for pruning and planting. The people who made the hanging gardens also made bowls and toys. They were human, they had families, they ate dinner and played with their children, and they built wonders in the moonlight, empires that rose like morning mist. Babylon was not always an empire. For many years, it was just one city among many. Other cities were stronger. Other kings ruled larger territories. But Babylon had something special. It had the river. It had fertile fields. It had smart people who could write and calculate. And it had patience. Slowly, generation after generation, Babylon grew stronger. Small wars were won. Alliances were made. Wealth accumulated, like water filling a well. Then came a king who changed everything. His name was Hammurabi. He ruled around the year 1750 before the Common Era. He was not the first king of Babylon, but he was the first to make Babylon an empire. Hammurabi was clever. He did not just fight wars. He made treaties. He promised to protect smaller cities if they obeyed him. He sent grain to cities suffering from famine. He married his daughters to foreign princes. These actions built loyalty. When he did go to war, he had allies. His enemies were isolated. One by one, he conquered the cities of Mesopotamia. He conquered Uruk, an ancient city to the south. He conquered Mari, a wealthy trading center to the west. He conquered Larsa, Eshnunna, and Assyria. By the end of his reign, Hammurabi ruled all the land between the two great rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates. This entire region was now Babylonian, and Hammurabi was its undisputed master. But Hammurabi is most famous for something else, not for conquest, but for law. He created a code of laws that was carved into a tall stone pillar. This pillar was placed in the center of Babylon, where everyone could see it. The laws were written in cuneiform. There were 282 laws in total. They covered everything. Laws about property and theft, laws about marriage and divorce, laws about trade and debt, laws about injury and murder. The laws were not equal for everyone. Punishments were harsher for poor people than for rich people. But the important thing was this: the laws were written down. They were public. Everyone could know what was legal and what was not. This was revolutionary. Before Hammurabi, justice was arbitrary. A powerful man could decide your fate based on his mood. But written law meant even the king had to follow rules. Well, in theory. In practice, the king still had enormous power. But the Code of Hammurabi was a step towards something we now call the rule of law. It influenced legal systems for thousands of years. The Romans studied it. Medieval scholars studied it. Even today, lawyers recognize Hammurabi as an ancestor of modern law. The stone pillar itself still exists. It is in the Louvre Museum in Paris. At the top, there is a carving. It shows Hammurabi standing before Shamash, the sun god. Shamash gives Hammurabi the laws. This meant the laws came from heaven, not just from human will. After Hammurabi died, the empire slowly weakened. His sons and grandsons were not as capable. Other nations grew strong and invaded. Babylon was conquered by the Hittites. Later, it was conquered by the Kassites. For centuries, Babylon was ruled by foreigners. The city survived, but its glory faded. The great temples fell into disrepair. The walls cracked. The canals filled with silt. It seemed as if Babylon's time had passed. But empires are like seeds. They can lie dormant for generations. Then, when conditions are right, they bloom again. And that is exactly what happened. In the 7th century before the Common Era, a new dynasty rose. They were called the Neo-Babylonians. And under their rule, Babylon would reach heights Hammurabi never dreamed of. The Neo-Babylonian kings rebuilt everything. They cleared the canals, they raised new walls, they constructed palaces that made Hammurabis look like cottages. The greatest of these kings was Nebuchadnezzar II, the same king who built the Ishtar Gate. Under Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon became the largest city on earth. Its population swelled to over 200,000 people. Merchants came from India, Egypt, and Greece. The markets overflowed with silk, spices, gold, and ivory. And in the heart of the royal palace, something extraordinary was built. A garden that seemed to float in the air. A garden that defied the desert. A garden that whispered secrets to the moonlight. That garden is why we are here tonight. That garden is the dream we are chasing through history. Myths forgotten in desert wind. Long before history was written, stories were told. Grandmothers told their grandchildren. Priests told worshippers. Travelers told each other around fires at night. These stories were not facts. They were deeper than facts. They explained why the world exists, why people die, why the seasons change, why we dream. These stories are called myths. Babylon had many myths. Some were terrifying. Some were beautiful. All of them tried to answer the biggest questions. And though Babylon fell thousands of years ago, its myths did not die. They were written on clay tablets. Those tablets were buried when cities burned. Modern archaeologists dug them up. And now we can read the dreams of ancient people as if they were whispered yesterday. The most famous Babylonian myth is the Epic of Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh was a king who ruled the city of Uruk. He was part human, part divine. He was strong and handsome, but he was also cruel and proud. He forced young men to build monuments. He took women from their families. The people prayed to the gods for help. The gods heard. They created a wild man named Enkidu. Enkidu lived with animals in the forest. He had never seen a city. The gods sent him to fight Gilgamesh. The two men met and wrestled. They fought for hours. Neither could win. Finally, exhausted, they started laughing. They became best friends. This is how the epic begins. Gilgamesh and Enkidu went on adventures together. They traveled to the cedar forest and killed a demon named Humbaba. They killed the bull of heaven sent by the goddess Ishtar. But their adventures angered the gods. As punishment, the gods decided Enkidu must die. Enkidu became sick. He grew weaker each day. Gilgamesh stayed by his side. He held his friend's hand as Enkidu died. This broke Gilgamesh's heart. He had never lost anyone before. He realized for the first time that he too would die someday. This terrified him. So Gilgamesh set out on a quest to find immortality. He wanted to live forever. He journeyed to the end of the earth. He crossed deserts and mountains. He met strange beings. He found a man named Utnapishtim, who had survived the great flood and been granted eternal life by the gods. Gilgamesh begged for the same gift. Utnapishtim told him about a plant that grows at the bottom of the ocean. This plant could make a person young again. Gilgamesh dove deep into the water. He found the plant. He was overjoyed, but on his journey home he stopped to bathe in a pond. While he swam, a snake smelled the plant. The snake ate it. The snake shed its skin and became young again. Gilgamesh returned to find the plant gone. He wept. He realized he could not escape death. He returned to Uruk, older and wiser. He accepted his mortality, and he found peace in knowing his city would outlive him. This story is heartbreaking and beautiful. It is about friendship. It is about loss. It is about accepting that all things end. The ancient Babylonians told this story for thousands of years. They understood what we still understand today. Life is short. Love is precious. Death comes for everyone. The Epic of Gilgamesh was written on clay tablets around 2,100 years before the Common Era. That makes it older than the Bible, older than Homer's epics. It is one of the oldest stories in the world. When archaeologists translated it in the 1800s, scholars were amazed. The flood story in Gilgamesh is similar to Noah's flood in the Bible. This suggests that ancient cultures shared stories across borders and centuries. Babylon had other myths too. The Enuma Elish tells how the god Marduk created the world by defeating the chaos monster Tiamat. After killing her, Marduk split her body in half. One half became the sky. The other became the earth. Humans were created from the blood of a defeated god, mixed with clay. This explained why humans are both divine and earthly, why we dream of heaven but live in dirt. These myths shaped how Babylonians saw themselves. They were part of the cosmos. They were connected to gods and monsters and stars. And when they built gardens, they built them as echoes of paradise. The gardens were myths made real, stories you could walk through, dreams you could touch. And under the moonlight, those gardens whispered the oldest stories of all. Voices from far trading roads. Babylon sat at the crossroads of the ancient world. To the east were the mountains of Persia, and beyond them India. To the west was the Mediterranean Sea, and the lands of Egypt and Greece. To the north were the Hittites and Assyrians. To the south was the Persian Gulf, and the sea routes to Arabia. All roads led through Babylon. This made it the greatest trading city in history. Merchants came from every direction. They brought goods that had traveled thousands of miles: silk from China, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, cedar wood from Lebanon, incense from Arabia, ivory from Africa. And they all met in Babylon's markets, where 100 languages mixed like colours in water. The markets were loud and bright. Merchants shouted the prices of their goods. They spread their wares on carpets in the dusty streets. You could buy anything in Babylon: clay lamps filled with olive oil, copper pots polished until they gleamed, baskets woven from river reeds, wool dyed purple with rare sea snails, gold jewellery set with precious stones. Slaves stood in chains, waiting to be purchased. Donkeys brayed, camels spit. Children ran through the crowds, chasing each other. Old women sat in the shade, selling dates and dried fish. The air smelled of sweat, spices, roasting meat, and dust. This was the heartbeat of empire. Wealth flowing like blood through veins. Not just goods travelled the trade routes, ideas travelled too. A merchant from India might tell a Babylonian about the Buddha's teachings. A Greek traveller might describe the philosophy of Pythagoras. An Egyptian priest might share secrets of mummification. These conversations happened in caravanserai, the inns where travellers rested. People from different worlds sat together, eating bread and drinking beer. They exchanged stories, jokes, and knowledge. Mathematics from India influenced Babylonian astronomers. Medical knowledge from Egypt improved Babylonian doctors. Artistic styles blended and evolved. This exchange made Babylon not just wealthy, but wise. It was a city that listened to the world. Among the most valuable imports were plants. Babylon's climate was harsh. Summers were brutally hot. Winters were mild but dry. Only certain plants could survive naturally: date palms, tamarisk trees, tough grasses. But traders brought seeds and cuttings from cooler, wetter lands. They brought grapevines from the mountains of Persia. They brought pomegranate trees from the Mediterranean coast. They brought roses from Damascus. They brought willow trees that loved water. They brought pine and cedar saplings wrapped in damp cloth. These plants were expensive. Some died on the journey, but those that survived became treasures. Rich Babylonians planted them in private courtyards. They watered them carefully. They shaded them from the fierce sun. These plants were status symbols. They said, "I am wealthy enough to defy nature itself." The hanging gardens, if they existed, would have required this same global network. You cannot build a mountain garden in the desert using only local plants. You need diversity. You need trees and flowers from many climates. You need experts who understand how to keep foreign plants alive. This means you need trade. You need merchants who will carry delicate saplings across hundreds of miles. You need gardeners who know the secrets of soil and water. The gardens would have been a botanical United Nations, Persian roses beside Egyptian lotus flowers, Lebanese cedars towering over Indian jasmine, each plant an ambassador from its homeland. Together, they created something that existed nowhere else on Earth. A paradise assembled, piece by piece, from the ends of the known world. Trade also brought craftsmen, stone carvers from Persia, mosaic artists from Greece, metal workers from Anatolia. These skilled workers came to Babylon because kings paid well. They came to build palaces and temples, and they came to build gardens. The engineering required to make water flow uphill required knowledge from multiple traditions. The Persians had invented the qanat, an underground water channel. The Egyptians had invented water wheels. The Babylonians learned from both. They combined techniques. They innovated. They created something new. This is the power of the crossroads. When knowledge meets, it multiplies. And under Babylon's moonlight, knowledge from 1,000 sources came together to create one impossible dream. A garden that floated between earth and sky. A garden that whispered in every language ever spoken by travelers on dusty roads. Patterns written in starlight. The Babylonians looked up every night. They saw patterns where we see chaos. They saw order where we see randomness. 5,000 years ago, they divided the night sky into sections. They named groups of stars after animals and gods. We still use some of these names today. Taurus the bull, Leo the lion, Scorpio the scorpion. These constellations are Babylon's gift to us. They mapped the heavens like we map roads. They created the zodiac, the belt of stars through which the sun and planets travel. They did this not for fortune-telling, though that came later. They did it to measure time. The stars were the most reliable clock in the world. They never stopped. They never failed. Babylonian astronomers discovered that planets move differently than stars. Stars stay in fixed patterns, but planets wander. The word planet comes from the Greek word for wanderer. The Babylonians tracked 5 planets visible to the naked eye: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. They gave these planets names of gods. Venus was Ishtar, the goddess of love. Mars was Nergal, the god of war. Jupiter was Marduk, the king of gods. They watched these planets move across the zodiac. They wrote down their positions every night for hundreds of years. This created an enormous database of observations. They noticed that planetary movements repeated in cycles. Venus appeared in the same position every 8 years. Mars every 15 years. They could predict where planets would be years in advance. This led to one of history's greatest achievements. In the 7th century before the Common Era, Babylonian astronomers predicted lunar eclipses. An eclipse happens when Earth's shadow falls on the moon. The moon darkens and sometimes turns red. To ancient people, this was terrifying. They thought the moon was being devoured by a demon. But Babylonian priests understood the geometry. They knew the sun, earth, and moon were spheres moving in space. They knew that shadows caused eclipses. They calculated the moon's orbit so precisely they could predict when these shadows would align. This was not magic. This was science, pure observation combined with mathematics. They also created the first accurate calendar. Most ancient cultures used lunar calendars. They counted months by the moon's phases. 12 lunar months equal 354 days. But the solar year, the time it takes Earth to orbit the sun, is 365 days. This creates a problem. Lunar months slowly drift out of sync with seasons. Planting time would shift. Harvest time would arrive early or late. The Babylonians solved this by adding an extra month every few years. This kept the calendar aligned with the sun. It was a leap year system, similar to what we use today. This calendar became the foundation for Jewish, Christian, and Islamic calendars. Every time we celebrate a holiday on a certain date, we are using mathematics invented beside the Euphrates River thousands of years ago. Babylon's astronomers were also philosophers. They asked why the heavens moved in perfect circles. Why did the same stars rise in the same places every night? Why was the cosmos so orderly? They concluded that the universe was governed by laws, not the whims of gods, but mathematical principles that never changed. This was a radical idea. It suggested that humans could understand the mind of creation through reason. This idea would later influence Greek philosophers like Plato and Aristotle. It would become the foundation of Western science. The idea that nature follows rules we can discover, that knowledge is possible, that the universe makes sense. All of this began with Babylonian priests sitting on ziggurats, counting stars in the silent desert night. When the Hanging Gardens were designed, they incorporated this cosmic wisdom. The garden terraces may have been aligned with cardinal directions: north, south, east, and west. The paths may have mirrored the zodiac or the movements of planets. Water channels may have been arranged in geometric patterns that echoed celestial mathematics. The gardens were not just beautiful, they were a three-dimensional model of the universe. Walking through them was like walking through the mind of the cosmos. Every tree and flower was positioned according to sacred geometry. Every fountain represented a celestial sphere. The gardens were heaven made tangible. And at night, under the very stars that inspired them, the gardens glowed in moonlight. A small piece of sky brought down to earth. A whisper written in starlight. Forces that bend rivers upward, water flows downhill. This is a law of nature. Rivers run from mountains to oceans. Rain falls from clouds to earth. No one can make water climb, or can they? The ancient world discovered several clever tricks. They invented machines that could lift water higher than its source. These machines did not break the laws of nature. They used nature's laws in creative ways. The Archimedes screw was one such machine. It was a spiral blade inside a tube. When you turned the screw, water rose through the spiral. The shadoof was another device. It was a long pole balanced on a pivot with a bucket on one end and a weight on the other. You pulled down the weighted end and the bucket dipped into the river. Then you released it, and the weight lifted the bucket high. These simple machines changed civilization. The Egyptians used shadoufs to water their fields beside the Nile. The Persians invented the noria, a giant wheel with buckets attached. As the wheel turned, buckets scooped water from a river and poured it into a high channel. These norias were powered by the river's own current or by oxen walking in circles. They could lift water 20 feet or more. This allowed irrigation of land far from the riverbank. It allowed gardens to grow on hillsides. The technology spread throughout the ancient world. Every civilization that wanted to control water studied these machines, and Babylon, with its genius for engineering, mastered them all. Babylonian engineers combined Persian Carnates, Egyptian water wheels, and their own innovations to create the most sophisticated irrigation system in the ancient world. The Carnat was especially important. This was an underground tunnel that carried water from mountains to cities. The tunnel was dug at a gentle slope. Water flowed through it by gravity, but because it was underground, it did not evaporate in the desert heat. Carnats could be many miles long. Digging them required surveying skills to maintain the correct slope. Too steep, and water would flow too fast and erode the tunnel. Too shallow, and water would not flow at all. Persian engineers used plumb lines and leveling instruments to get the angle perfect. Babylonian engineers learned this technique. They dug carnats to bring water from distant springs to the city. This water supplied households, fountains, and gardens. Without carnats, Babylon could not have supported such a large population in the desert. For the Hanging Gardens, even carnats were not enough. The The gardens were built on terraces high above the ground. Some accounts say 75 feet high. That is the height of a 7-story building. How do you get water up there? You need pumps. The chain pump was one solution. Imagine a loop of chain with flat plates attached. The chain runs over 2 wheels, one at the bottom in the water, one at the top where the water is needed. As the chain moves, the plates scoop water and carry it upward. The plates fit snugly inside a tube, so water cannot spill back down. At the top, the plates tip and pour the water into a channel. Someone, probably slaves or oxen, had to turn the wheel constantly. This was hard work, but it worked. Another option was the Archimedes screw, though it was named after the Greek inventor who lived centuries later. The principle may have been known earlier. You place a spiral blade inside a tilted tube. The bottom end sits in water. You turn the screw and water gets caught in the spiral. As the spiral turns, water moves upward through the tube. At the top, it pours out. This method was less efficient than the chain pump for great heights, but it was simpler and easier to maintain. The hanging gardens probably used multiple pumping methods. Different heights might have used different technologies. Water was lifted in stages, from the river to a reservoir, from the reservoir to the first terrace, from the first terrace to the second, and so on. Each stage required labour and machinery. The gardens were not just beautiful, they were feats of engineering. They were water made to defy gravity. They were rivers flowing upward toward the stars. The sound of water in the gardens must have been magical. Remember, Babylon was a city of dust and heat. The Euphrates flowed nearby, but most of the city was dry, stone and brick and sand. Then you enter the royal palace. You climb stairs to the gardens, and suddenly you hear it, trickling, splashing, the gentle music of fountains and streams. You see water cascading down stone channels. You see pools reflecting the sky. You see moisture on green leaves. The air is cool and humid. Birds sing. Frogs croak in the ponds. It is as if you have stepped into another world. A world where the rules are different, where the impossible becomes real, where human will bend nature to create paradise. This is what engineering can achieve. Not just function, but wonder. Not just survival, but beauty. The gardens whispered this truth to everyone who saw them, and that whisper still echoes today. Truth and legend intertwined. Did the hanging gardens really exist? This is the question that haunts historians. We have ancient writings that describe them. Greek and Roman authors mention them with awe. They call the gardens one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. But here is the puzzle. No Babylonian text clearly describes them. No archaeological evidence has been found at Babylon's ruins. The German archaeologist Robert Koldewey excavated Babylon for 18 years. He found the Ishtar Gate, he found palace foundations, he found temples and walls, but he found no definite trace of the gardens. This creates a mystery. Were the ancient writers wrong? Were they describing something that never existed? Or are we looking in the wrong place? The Greek historian Strabo wrote about the gardens around the year 20 of the Common Era. He said they were built by a Syrian king for his Persian wife who missed the mountains of her homeland. He described terraces rising one above another, planted with large trees. He described stone columns supporting the terraces and vaulted rooms underneath. He said machines lifted water from the Euphrates to irrigate the highest levels. His description is detailed and specific. Another writer, Philo of Byzantium, wrote earlier. He said the gardens hung from the roof of a palace, supported on massive stone cubes. He called them a wonder that defied nature. Diodorus Siculus also described them, mentioning the same queen and the same engineering marvels. 3 independent sources, all agreeing on the basic facts. This suggests something real was being described. But ancient writers sometimes exaggerated. They sometimes repeated stories they heard without verifying them. The 7 Wonders list was created by Greek tourists. It was an ancient travel guide. The wonders were famous sites worth visiting. But fame does not always mean accuracy. Consider the Colossus of Rhodes, another wonder. It was a giant bronze statue. Ancient writers said ships sailed between its legs. Modern scholars know this was impossible. The statue was large, but not that large. So if ancient writers exaggerated about one wonder, might they have exaggerated about another? Maybe the gardens existed but were smaller and less spectacular than described. Or maybe they were beautiful roof gardens that got mythologized into something grander. Or maybe they did not exist at all, except in imagination. Historians have debated this for centuries. Some accept the ancient accounts at face value. Others are skeptical. The evidence is frustratingly incomplete. We have no contemporary Babylonian records mentioning the gardens. King Nebuchadnezzar left many inscriptions describing his building projects. He bragged about rebuilding city walls, constructing the Ishtar Gate, and restoring temples, but he never mentioned gardens. This is strange. If the gardens were as magnificent as the Greeks claimed, why would Nebuchadnezzar not boast about them? One theory is that the inscriptions mentioning the gardens have been lost. Thousands of clay tablets remain untranslated. Perhaps one of them describes the gardens in detail. We just have not found it yet. Another theory is that the Greeks confused Babylon with another city. Dr. Stephanie Daly, a scholar at Oxford University, proposed in 2013 that the gardens were actually in Nineveh, the capital of Assyria. Nineveh was 250 miles north of Babylon. King Sennacherib of Assyria ruled around 700 before the Common Era. He left inscriptions describing a magnificent garden he built. He boasted about engineering an entire river system to water it. He mentioned planting exotic trees from many lands. He described the gardens as a wonder that amazed visitors. Could the Greeks have heard about these gardens and mistakenly attributed them to Babylon? It is possible. Babylon was more famous. When Greeks wrote about Mesopotamia, they often mentioned Babylon even when describing other cities. The confusion could have been innocent. So where does this leave us? We have legend and we have evidence. The legend is beautiful. The evidence is incomplete. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere between. Perhaps gardens existed in both Nineveh and Babylon. Perhaps they were impressive, but not quite as miraculous as described. Perhaps what matters is not whether every detail is factual, but what the legend represents. The Hanging Gardens are a symbol of human creativity, a symbol of love and beauty triumphing over harsh desert, a symbol of reaching for the impossible. Even if they existed only in stories, those stories have inspired people for 2,000 years. They have inspired architects and poets. They have inspired dreamers and gardeners. That inspiration is real. And tonight, as moonlight falls on ancient ruins, we can still feel the whisper of those gardens. Real or imagined, they live in our minds. And there, they bloom forever. Lines that cross many empires. Babylon did not fall suddenly. It fell slowly, like a tree dying from the inside. For generations, it had been the strongest city in Mesopotamia. Its walls were thick, its army was powerful, its gods were feared. But empires grow old, just like people. They become tired. Their children are not as strong as their parents. Their enemies grow bolder. In the year 539 before the Common Era, a new power rose in the east. The Persians, led by King Cyrus the Great, swept across the region like a windstorm. They conquered Media. They conquered Lydia. Then they turned their eyes toward Babylon. The Babylonian king was Nabonidus. He was unpopular. The priests disliked him. The army did not trust him. When Cyrus approached, the city opened its gates without a fight. Babylon fell not to violence, but to exhaustion. Cyrus was a wise conqueror. He did not destroy Babylon. He did not burn its temples or tear down its walls. He understood that ruling an empire required respect, not just fear. He declared himself the legitimate king of Babylon. He made offerings to Marduk in the great temple. He allowed the priests to continue their rituals. He freed people who had been enslaved by previous kings. Among these were the Jews, who had been exiled to Babylon decades earlier. Cyrus let them return to Jerusalem. This act of mercy is recorded in the Bible. The Persians ruled Babylon gently. The city remained wealthy. The markets stayed busy. The ziggurats still stood. And if the hanging gardens existed, they were maintained by Persian gardeners. The flowers did not care who ruled them. They bloomed regardless of flags and borders. 2 centuries later, another conqueror came. His name was Alexander. Alexander of Macedon, later called Alexander the Great. He was young, only in his 20s, but he had already conquered Greece, Egypt, and Persia. He marched east with an army that seemed unstoppable. In 331 before the Common Era, he defeated the Persian king Darius at the Battle of Gaugamela. After the battle, Alexander marched to Babylon. The city had been under Persian rule for 200 years. But now it would have a new master. Alexander entered Babylon in triumph. The people lined the streets, throwing flowers. The priests welcomed him. Alexander was fascinated by Babylon. He had heard stories about it since childhood. Now he walked its streets in person. Alexander declared Babylon would be the capital of his empire. He planned to rebuild it. He wanted to make it even grander than before. He ordered the restoration of temples that had fallen into disrepair. He ordered the clearing of canals. He spent months in Babylon, planning his next campaigns. But he also enjoyed its pleasures. If the hanging gardens still existed, Alexander certainly saw them. Imagine him walking through those terraces, a Greek king in a Babylonian paradise, surrounded by flowers from Persia, trees from Lebanon, fountains engineered by Assyrian methods. The gardens would have been a perfect symbol of his empire, a fusion of many cultures into something magnificent. Alexander loved symbols. He loved beauty. He would have spent hours in those gardens, dreaming of future conquests. But Alexander never completed his plans for Babylon. In 323 before the Common Era, at the age of 32, he fell ill. Some say it was malaria, some say poison, some say exhaustion. For days, he lay in his palace in Babylon, burning with fever. His generals gathered around his bed. They asked who should inherit his empire. Alexander's answer was vague. He said, "To the strongest." Then he died. His death threw the empire into chaos. His generals fought each other for control. The empire split into pieces. Babylon changed hands several times. Slowly, it declined. New capitals rose in other cities. Alexandria in Egypt, Antioch in Syria, Seleucia near Babylon. Trade routes shifted. Wealth flowed elsewhere. The canals fell into disrepair. Silt clogged the waterways. Without water, the gardens could not survive. If they still existed by Alexander's time, they likely died soon after. The trees withered, the terraces crumbled, the pumps rusted, paradise faded back into desert. Yet the memory remained. Greek and Roman writers continued to describe the gardens. They described them as they had been, not as they were. This is how legends are born. A glorious past is remembered, polished, and passed down. Each generation adds a little more shine. The gardens became a symbol of a lost golden age. People looked back and sighed. They said the ancients knew how to build true wonders. We have lost that knowledge, they lamented. But this was not entirely true. The knowledge was not lost. It was transformed. The Romans built aqueducts that carried water across mountains. Medieval Arabs built irrigation systems in Spain. Renaissance Italians built fountain gardens in Florence and Rome. The dream of the hanging gardens lived on in every culture that tried to make water dance and flowers bloom where nature said they should not. The garden's legacy was not in bricks and trees. It was in the human spirit that refuses to accept limits. That spirit crossed empires, languages, and centuries. And it is with us still tonight. What the ancients meant to say, language changes over time. Words shift in meaning. What meant one thing to ancient Greeks means something different to us. This creates confusion when we read old texts. The Hanging Gardens are a perfect example. In Greek, they were called chromastos. This word is usually translated as hanging, but it does not mean hanging by ropes or chains. It means overhanging. It means jutting out, like a balcony that projects from a wall. The gardens were not suspended in the air by magic. They were built on terraces that stuck out from the palace. Each terrace was like a giant shelf. Trees and flowers grew on these shelves. From a distance, especially from below, the green plants would seem to hang in the air. This is what amazed ancient visitors. Not literal hanging, but the illusion of it. The word paradise also has an interesting history. It comes from the old Persian word paradisa. This word meant an enclosed garden, a walled space where trees, flowers, and water were arranged for beauty and pleasure. The Persians were master gardeners. They created oasis gardens in the desert. These gardens were divided into 4 sections by water channels, representing the 4 rivers of paradise. In the center was often a pavilion or fountain. These gardens were cool, shaded, private. They were escapes from the hot, dusty world outside. When Greeks encountered Persian gardens, they were enchanted. They borrowed the word and the concept. Later, the word paradise entered Latin, then English. Now it means any perfect, blissful place. But it started as a simple description of a walled garden in ancient Persia. The Hanging Gardens were a kind of paradise in this original sense. Another important word is terrace. A terrace is a flat area cut into a slope or built up from level ground. Farmers create terraces on hillsides to prevent erosion and create planting surfaces. The Hanging Gardens were essentially agricultural terraces, but built in the middle of a flat city. They were artificial hills. Imagine stacking large platforms on top of each other, like a wedding cake. Each platform is smaller than the one below. You plant each level with different trees and flowers. You build stairs or ramps to move between levels. Water is channeled to flow from the top level down through the lower levels. This design serves 2 purposes. It allows you to grow plants that need different amounts of sun and water. Plants that like full sun go on top. Plants that prefer shade go on lower levels where they are shaded by the trees above. It also creates a dramatic visual effect. From below, you see a mountain of green rising toward the sky. The ancient writers sometimes contradicted each other on details. Strabo said the terraces were square. Diodorus said they were rectangular. Philo said each terrace was a certain size, but gave measurements that seem impossibly large. These contradictions frustrate historians, but they also make sense if we remember none of these writers saw the gardens personally. They were repeating stories told by travelers. It is like the game of telephone. A message gets slightly changed each time it is passed along. The core truth remains. There were terraced gardens, they were impressive, they were well watered, but the exact dimensions and layout? Those details were lost or confused. This is why archaeology is so important. Physical evidence does not contradict itself. A wall is a certain height. A channel has a certain width. If we could find the garden's foundation, all confusion would end. But so far, that foundation has not been found. Modern translators have tried to reconstruct the ancient descriptions with fresh eyes. They have compared the Greek texts with Babylonian building techniques. They have looked at similar structures from the same period. The consensus is this: the gardens were probably a series of stone or brick terraces built against or on top of a palace building. Each terrace was waterproofed with layers of reeds, bitumen, and lead to prevent water from seeping through and rotting the structure. Soil was piled on top of the waterproofing, probably several feet deep to allow tree roots to grow. Stone columns or vaults supported the terraces from below. Water was lifted by mechanical pumps to a reservoir at the top. From there, it flowed down through channels, irrigating each level. This design is ambitious, but not impossible. Similar terraced gardens existed in other ancient cities. The innovation was the scale and the height. That is what made them a wonder. Understanding what the ancient words actually meant brings the gardens into focus. They were not magic, they were not floating in the clouds. They were brilliant engineering disguised as natural beauty. They were human hands shaping stone, soil, water, and plants into something that looked effortless. That is the highest art, when the mechanics disappear and only beauty remains. When you walk through a garden and forget that someone designed it, someone dug the channels, someone chose which tree goes where. You just see green and smell flowers and hear water. You feel peace. The hanging gardens, if they existed, achieved this. They were so well made that they seemed like nature herself had decided to build a mountain in Babylon. But it was not nature. It was human love and human genius. And the words the ancients chose, however imperfect, tried to capture that wonder, tried to say, we saw something impossible, and it was real. Pictures drawn by distant eyes. For 1,000 years after Babylon fell, the hanging gardens lived only in words. But humans need pictures. We need to see. In the Middle Ages, when scribes copied ancient texts, they sometimes added illustrations. These illustrations were imaginary. The artists had never been to Mesopotamia. They had never seen Babylonian architecture. So they drew gardens that looked European. They drew castles with pointed towers. They drew ladies in medieval dresses walking through flower beds. They drew fountains that looked Roman. These pictures were wrong in every detail, but they preserved something important, the idea that beauty and wonder had existed in the ancient world. They kept the dream alive. During the Renaissance, interest in ancient history revived. Artists and scholars studied Greek and Roman texts with new intensity. They wanted to understand the classical world accurately. They wanted to recreate its greatness. When Renaissance artists painted the hanging gardens, they tried to be more authentic. They showed ziggurats and palm trees. They showed terraces stacked high. They included exotic elements, elephants, camels, turbaned figures. These details came from travelers' accounts of the Ottoman Empire. Europeans of the 1500s thought the Middle East had not changed much since ancient times. This was partly true. Some traditions and technologies had endured, but Babylon in its prime looked different from Constantinople or Baghdad. Still, Renaissance paintings brought the gardens closer to reality than medieval ones had. By the 1800s, archaeology was becoming a science. Explorers traveled to Mesopotamia and excavated ancient cities. They sent artifacts back to European museums. They published drawings of what they found. This gave artists new information. Paintings of Babylon from the Victorian era show massive walls and gates. They show cuneiform tablets and winged bulls. But the hanging gardens remained mysterious because no archaeological evidence for them was found. So artists relied on ancient descriptions and their imagination. Some Victorian paintings show the gardens as elaborate greenhouses with iron and glass. These reflected the artist's own era. The 1800s loved technology. They built crystal palaces and grand railway stations. They imagined ancient wonders must have used similar engineering. This was anachronistic, but it revealed how each era interprets the past through its own values. 20th century artists took different approaches. Some were realistic, attempting to reconstruct what the gardens might have actually looked like based on scholarship. These paintings show brick terraces, chain pumps, and realistic plant species. They look like architectural plans brought to colour. Other artists were romantic, painting dreamlike visions of lush, impossible greenery cascading down golden walls. These paintings were not concerned with accuracy. They were concerned with feeling. They wanted to capture the emotion of standing before something wondrous. Both approaches have value. The realistic paintings teach us what might have been possible. The romantic paintings teach us why we care. Facts matter, but so do dreams. Digital artists today create three-dimensional reconstructions using computer software. These reconstructions can be explored like video games. You can virtually walk through the gardens. You can see them from every angle. You can watch water flow through the channels. These reconstructions are based on the best available scholarship. They incorporate archaeological evidence from similar sites. They use botanical knowledge to show which plants could realistically grow in Babylon's climate. They calculate engineering tolerances to ensure the structure could actually stand. This is the most accurate visualization we have ever had. Yet even these are speculative. We are still guessing, still imagining, still drawing pictures from distant eyes. What all these images share, from medieval manuscripts to modern CGI, is longing. A longing for beauty, a longing for a time when humans built with such ambition, a longing for gardens that defied the desert. Every artist who has tried to capture the hanging gardens has added their own soul to the image, their own hopes and aesthetics. In this way, the gardens have become a collective artwork, a painting made by humanity across centuries. Each generation adds a brushstroke. We may never know exactly what the gardens look like, but we know what they mean to us. They mean that beauty is worth pursuing, that nature and human design can collaborate, that love can inspire monuments. And as we stand tonight in the moonlight, we can close our eyes and see our own version. Each of us holds a unique picture, and all of them, in some small way, are true, bringing stone words to modern day. In the late 1800s, European nations became obsessed with archaeology. They competed to find the greatest treasures of the ancient world. France excavated Egypt. Britain excavated Assyria. Germany wanted Babylon. In 1899, a German archaeologist named Robert Koldewey arrived at the ruins of Babylon. The site was a series of mounds in the Iraqi desert, not far from modern Baghdad. For centuries, local people had mined these mounds for bricks. They used the ancient bricks to build their own houses. This had damaged the site severely, but Koldewey believed important discoveries remained buried. He organized a team and began to dig. He would work at Babylon for 18 years until World War I forced him to stop. Koldewey's excavation was systematic. He did not just dig randomly looking for treasure. He measured everything. He drew maps. He recorded where each artifact was found. This was modern archaeology. His team uncovered the Ishtar Gate, buried under centuries of sand. They found blue glazed bricks with golden animals. They carefully photographed each piece and shipped the most important ones to Berlin. There, the gate was reconstructed in the Pergamon Museum, where it still stands today. Koldewey also found the foundations of Nebuchadnezzar's palace. Room after room was mapped. Throne rooms, storage rooms, courtyards. The palace had been enormous. It covered many acres. This was where the king had lived, and if the hanging gardens existed, they would have been part of this palace complex. Koldewey found a structure he thought might be the gardens. It was a building with unusually thick walls and a series of vaulted chambers. The walls were strong enough to support great weight. The vaults created spaces underneath, perhaps for storage or to allow air circulation. Near this building, he found a well with a unique feature, a triple shaft design that looked like it could have been used for a chain pump. Water from the Euphrates could have been lifted through this well, to irrigate elevated gardens. Koldewey was excited. He published his findings and suggested this was the location of the famous gardens. Many scholars initially agreed. Finally, physical evidence had been found, but over time, doubts emerged. The structure Koldewey found was relatively small. Could it have supported gardens large enough to be called a wonder? The layout did not quite match the ancient descriptions. Perhaps this building served another purpose. Perhaps it was an administrative building or a storage facility. No other location at Babylon has provided better evidence. Excavations continued through the 20th century, though wars and political instability often interrupted the work. Saddam Hussein, who ruled Iraq in the late 20th century, became obsessed with Babylon. He saw himself as a new Nebuchadnezzar. He ordered the reconstruction of parts of the ancient city. Unfortunately, his workers built on top of ancient foundations, destroying archaeological layers in the process. They used modern bricks stamped with Hussein's name, mixing them with ancient bricks. This made it difficult for archaeologists to determine what was original and what was modern. Hussein even built a palace for himself on a hill overlooking the ruins. He threw parties there, imagining himself as an ancient king reborn. His megalomania damaged our ability to understand the past. War came again. The site suffered more destruction. Today, Babylon is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, but much has been lost forever. Despite all the excavation, no clear evidence of the Hanging Gardens has been found in Babylon. This has led some scholars to conclude they never existed there. Others believe the evidence simply has not been discovered yet. The site is huge. Much remains unexcavated. Clay tablets are still being translated. Perhaps tomorrow, a researcher will read a tablet and find the words, "Here are the gardens of which the Greeks speak." Or perhaps archaeologists will discover a massive foundation clearly designed for terraced gardens. Until then, we have an absence that haunts and fascinates. Why can we not find them? If they were so magnificent, where did they go? The desert has swallowed many things. Entire cities have been buried. Perhaps the gardens are still down there, waiting. Or perhaps they were built of materials that decayed completely. Wood, soil, and plant matter all vanish given enough time. Only stone and fired clay survive millennia. If the gardens were primarily organic, they would leave little trace. Yet the search continues. New technologies offer hope. Ground-penetrating radar can detect buried structures without digging. Satellite imagery can reveal subtle changes in elevation that suggest ancient foundations. Genetic studies of plant remains can tell us what species grew in ancient Mesopotamia. Climatology reconstructs past weather patterns, helping us understand what could have thrived in Babylon's gardens. Each piece of evidence is a word in a broken sentence. Slowly, the sentence is being reconstructed. We may never have complete certainty, but we are learning. The stones are speaking if we listen carefully, and every word they speak brings us closer to understanding what secrets slept within the gardens of Babylon's moonlight. The past is patient. It waits for us to become wise enough to hear it, and in that waiting, the mystery deepens and the wonder grows. The first clear revelations. In 2013, something remarkable happened. Dr. Stephanie Daly, a scholar at Oxford University, published research that challenged everything historians thought they knew. She proposed that the Hanging Gardens were not in Babylon at all. They were in Nineveh, the capital of Assyria, 250 miles to the north. This was shocking. For 2,000 years, everyone assumed the gardens were Babylonian. But Daly had found evidence that suggested otherwise. She had studied cuneiform texts that previous scholars had overlooked or misinterpreted. She had examined bas-reliefs from Assyrian palaces that showed gardens on hillsides with water flowing through aqueducts. And she had found inscriptions from King Sennacherib of Assyria that described a garden matching the ancient descriptions of the Hanging Gardens. Sennacherib ruled from 704 to 681 before the Common Era. He was a contemporary of the Babylonian kings, but Assyria was a rival power. Sennacherib was an ambitious builder. He loved engineering projects. He built aqueducts that brought water from mountains 50 miles away to Nineveh. These aqueducts were marvels of precision. They maintained a gentle slope over dozens of miles, so water would flow steadily. They included stone bridges and channels cut through rock. One inscription describes Sennacherib creating a wonder for all peoples. He says he planted trees from many lands in his garden. He mentions cedars, cypresses, and even cotton plants, which were exotic imports. He describes using screws to lift water. The Archimedes screw was supposedly invented centuries later, but Sennacherib's description matches that technology exactly. Dali also found reliefs showing gardens in Nineveh that looked like the descriptions of the Hanging Gardens. These reliefs show trees growing on terraces. They show water channels and aqueducts. They show columns supporting platforms. In one relief, you can see the city of Nineveh with a massive garden beside the palace. This garden has multiple levels and is filled with vegetation. Why would artists carve these images if such gardens did not exist? The archaeological evidence supports this too. Nineveh's location is more suitable for gardens than Babylon. Nineveh is closer to mountains. It receives more rainfall. Its soil is better. The rivers near Nineveh, the Tigris and its tributaries, flow faster and more reliably than the Euphrates. Creating elevated gardens would have been easier there. So why did the Greeks say the gardens were in Babylon? Dali believes there was confusion. Greek writers visiting Mesopotamia centuries later may have heard about the gardens but misunderstood their location. Babylon was the more famous city. It was synonymous with Mesopotamian civilization. So, when Greeks wrote about Mesopotamian wonders, they placed them in Babylon even if they were elsewhere. Consider also that by the time Greeks like Strabo wrote about the gardens, Nineveh had been destroyed. It was a ruin. But Babylon still existed as a functioning city. Travelers could visit it. So stories about gardens got associated with the living city rather than the dead one. This kind of historical compression happens often. Details merge and shift over generations of retelling. Not all scholars accept Dali's theory. Some argue that her evidence is circumstantial. Sennacherib's inscriptions do describe impressive gardens, but do they describe the specific features mentioned by the Greeks? The debate continues. But Dali's work has changed the conversation. It has reminded historians that ancient texts must be read carefully and critically. It has shown that locations can be mistaken and that legendary sites may not be where tradition places them. This is both exciting and frustrating. Exciting because it opens new avenues of research. Frustrating because it means we may never have certainty. But perhaps certainty is not the point. Perhaps the search itself is what matters. The careful reading of broken tablets. The slow excavation of buried walls. The patient reconstruction of vanished worlds. What Dali's research reveals is that the desire to build paradise is universal. Whether in Babylon or Nineveh, whether by Nebuchadnezzar or Sennacherib, humans have always tried to make beauty in harsh places. The specific king and city matter less than the impulse. That impulse is what connects us to the ancients. They looked at desert and thought, what if water flowed here? What if trees grew? What if we could make the impossible real? And they tried. With every tool and technique available, they tried. Some of their attempts succeeded, some failed, but all of them were acts of hope. And hope, once planted, grows across millennia. It grows in the mind of a scholar in Oxford reading ancient texts. It grows in our hearts tonight as we imagine terraced gardens glowing in moonlight. Whether in Babylon or Nineveh, whether real or legendary, the gardens are a seed that has never stopped growing, eyes lifted to cosmic wonder. The ancient world did not separate science from religion. They were woven together like threads in a tapestry. When Babylonian priests studied the stars, they were performing both astronomy and theology. When they designed temples, they used geometry and sacred symbolism. Gardens were the same. A garden was not just a collection of plants, it was a model of the universe. It was heaven made visible. The Persians understood this deeply. Their paradise gardens were divided into 4 sections by water channels. These 4 channels represented the 4 rivers of paradise mentioned in their holy texts. The center of the garden, where the channels met, was the axis mundi, the center of the world. To walk through such a garden was to walk through creation itself. Babylonian cosmology taught that the universe had layers. The underworld was below, dark and still. The earth was in the middle, flat and wide. The heavens were above, a dome where gods lived. Between these realms were boundaries, but the boundaries could be crossed. Temples were crossing points. The ziggurat allowed humans to climb toward heaven. Rituals allowed gods to descend to earth. Gardens could also be crossing points. A garden elevated on terraces lifted earth toward sky. Water flowing through the garden brought the life-giving force of the gods down to human level. Trees stretched upward like prayers. Their roots went down into the underworld while their branches reached towards the stars. In a garden, all 3 cosmic realms touched. This made gardens sacred spaces. The arrangement of plants in ancient gardens was not random. Plants were chosen and placed according to symbolic meaning. Palms were sacred to specific gods. Cypress trees represented immortality because they were evergreen. Pomegranates symbolized fertility because of their many seeds. Flowers had meanings based on color and scent. Red flowers were associated with love and blood. White flowers with purity and death. Fragrant flowers were believed to attract good spirits. By arranging these plants thoughtfully, gardeners created a language. Walking through the garden, you read a story told in leaves and petals. The hanging gardens, designed for a queen who missed her mountainous homeland, may have told a story about longing and consolation, about bringing home to a foreign place, about making the impossible possible through love. The geometry of the gardens would have reflected cosmic order. Ancient cultures loved symmetry. They saw the universe as balanced and harmonious. Chaos was the enemy. Order was divine. Gardens expressed this through their layout. Paths might run north-south and east-west, aligned with the cardinal directions. These directions were not arbitrary. North was associated with certain gods and qualities. South with others. East was where the sun rose, symbolizing birth and renewal. West was where it set, symbolizing death and completion. A person walking through the garden would be walking through space and time, through the cycle of life, through the structure of the cosmos. Every turn had meaning. Every vista revealed truth. Water was especially symbolic. In the desert, water is life. Without it, everything dies. Water was a gift from the gods. It came from the sky as rain or from the mountains as rivers. It was pure and powerful. In a garden, water was both decorative and sacred. Fountains represented springs from the divine realm. Pools reflected the sky, bringing heaven down to earth level. Channels guided water in controlled paths, showing human mastery over chaos. But the water's flow also reminded people of nature's power. Water cannot truly be controlled. It will always find a way. This tension between control and surrender was at the heart of garden design. The garden was human order imposed on natural energy. It was a collaboration between human will and natural force. And when that collaboration succeeded, the result was paradise. Standing in such a garden at night, under the moon, must have felt like standing at the center of existence. Above, the stars wheeled in their eternal patterns. Below, water murmured in channels carved by human hands. Around, trees whispered in the breeze, their leaves catching moonlight. The air smelled of jasmine and wet earth. Your feet touched soil, but your spirit soared. This was the garden's purpose, not just to please the eye or provide shade, but to lift the soul, to remind people that they were part of something vast and beautiful, that the universe was not cold and empty, but alive with meaning, that every flower, every star, every drop of water was connected in a web of purpose. The hanging gardens, if they fulfilled this purpose, were more than a wonder. They were a doorway, a threshold between the human and the divine. And for a moment, standing in their moonlight, a person could step through history, repeating in soft circles. The hanging gardens may have vanished, but their echo never faded. Throughout history, cultures have tried to recreate that same magic. The dream of elevated gardens, of green terraces rising toward the sky, appears again and again. The Persians built them, the Romans built them, medieval Arabs built them, Renaissance Italians built them. Each culture added its own style, but the core idea remained: bring paradise to earth through water, stone, and plants. This repetition tells us something important. The hanging gardens were not just one king's folly. They represented a deep human need, a need to beautify our surroundings, a need to prove we can overcome nature's limits, a need to create spaces where our souls can rest. The Romans loved gardens. Wealthy Romans built elaborate villas with terraced gardens overlooking the sea or countryside. The Emperor Tiberius built gardens on the island of Capri with multiple levels connected by stairs. Water was piped from distant springs. Exotic plants were imported from across the empire. Roman garden design emphasized symmetry and control. Hedges were trimmed into geometric shapes. Paths formed perfect rectangles. Fountains were engineered marvels using aqueduct technology. These gardens were different from Babylonian ones in style, but similar in ambition. They said, "We have mastered nature. We have created order from chaos." The Romans knew about the hanging gardens. They included them in their lists of world wonders, and they tried to equal them in their own way. After Rome fell, the garden tradition moved east and south. The Islamic Golden Age produced incredible gardens, especially in Spain and Persia. The Alhambra in Granada, Spain, is perhaps the most famous. Built in the 1300s, it features courtyards with fountains, geometric tile work, and carefully arranged plants. Water channels divide the courtyards into 4 sections, just like ancient Persian gardens. The sound of water is everywhere, providing coolness and calm. The Mughals in India built similar gardens. The Taj Mahal sits in a garden designed as paradise. 4 rivers flow from a central pavilion. The entire complex is aligned with cosmic principles. These gardens were not just decoration. They were theology in physical form. They expressed belief that heaven could be glimpsed on earth, that the divine order could be made visible through human art. The Italian Renaissance revived interest in classical culture. Italian nobles built villas with terraced gardens in imitation of Roman models. The Villa d'Este near Rome is spectacular. Built in the 1500s, it features hundreds of fountains. Water flows down the hillside through elaborate channels, pools, and jets. The sound is like music. The gardens demonstrate complete mastery of hydraulic engineering. Pumps lift water to the highest terraces. Gravity brings it down through increasingly complex pathways. It is a symphony of water and stone. The architects who designed it knew about the hanging gardens. They tried to create something equally magnificent, and in many ways they succeeded. The Villa d'Este still exists. You can visit it today. You can walk through Paradise Made Real by Renaissance genius. Even today, the tradition continues. Modern architects build vertical gardens on skyscrapers. Green walls cover concrete with living plants. Rooftop gardens provide oasis spaces in crowded cities. Singapore has built an entire philosophy around being a city in a garden. Skyscrapers are covered with vegetation, bridges have trees growing on them, technology allows plants to thrive in unlikely places. Drip irrigation, hydroponics, computer-controlled climate systems. All of these make vertical gardening easier than ever before. We are still trying to make the desert bloom, still trying to bring green to grey, still trying to create the hanging gardens again and again, under new names and in new forms. The dream never dies, because the need never dies. This recurring pattern teaches us something profound. Beauty is not frivolous, it is essential. Humans will spend enormous effort and wealth to create beautiful spaces. We do this even when it is impractical, even when it defies common sense. A garden in the desert, a fountain in the mountains, flowers on a rooftop. We do these things because we must, because beauty feeds something in our souls that cannot be satisfied any other way. The hanging gardens of Babylon, whether they were in Babylon or Nineveh, whether they were exactly as described or somewhat different, represent this eternal human impulse. They are not really in the past. They are in every garden that has ever been planted with love. They are in every fountain that has ever cooled hot air. They are in the moonlight falling on green leaves anywhere in the world. The gardens live because we keep rebuilding them. And we will keep rebuilding them as long as humans exist. This is history repeating, not as tragedy, but as beauty. Soft circles that never end. Doors opening to hidden knowledge. Science can tell us things that written history cannot. When archaeologists excavate ancient sites, they find more than bricks and pottery. They find seeds, tiny, dried seeds preserved in jars or embedded in soil. They find pollen grains, microscopic and nearly indestructible. They find plant remains in garbage pits and storage rooms. From these fragments, scientists can reconstruct what grew in ancient gardens. This field is called paleoethnobotany. It is detective work using biology. Every seed is a clue, every grain of pollen is evidence. And slowly, we are learning what the hanging gardens, if they existed, might have contained. Not from imagination or legend, but from hard science. The climate of ancient Mesopotamia was similar to today's. Hot, dry summers. Mild winters with occasional rain. The Euphrates and Tigris rivers provided water, but away from the rivers, the land was desert or steppe. In such a climate, certain plants thrive naturally. Date palms are perfectly adapted. They tolerate heat and saline soil. Their roots can reach deep for water. Babylonians grew thousands of date palms. Dates were a staple food, but dates alone do not make a paradise garden. For that, you need diversity. You need flowers, shade trees, fruit trees, and aromatic plants. These would have been imported from wetter, cooler regions. Lebanon, Persia, the mountains of Anatolia. Archaeological evidence shows that Babylonians did import such plants. Cedar logs from Lebanon have been found in palace foundation. Pomegranate seeds have been discovered in jars. Rose remains appear in elite contexts. Palynology, the study of pollen, provides another window into the past. Pollen is incredibly durable. It survives in soil for thousands of years. Different plants produce distinctively shaped pollen. Under a microscope, scientists can identify which plant species were present in a location. Pollen studies from Mesopotamian sites show a mix of local and imported species. Olive pollen, for example, appears at sites near the Mediterranean, but also occasionally in Babylonia. This suggests olives were cultivated in gardens, even though they are not native. Grapevine pollen tells a similar story. Grapes came from mountain regions, but were grown in Babylonian vineyards and gardens. Each type of pollen is a word in a sentence about what grew where. And together, these words tell us that Babylonian gardens were diverse and sophisticated. If the hanging gardens existed, what would they have contained? Based on evidence and educated guesses, we can create a likely plant list. The lowest terraces, with the most shade and moisture, would have trees. Willows and poplars love water. Plane trees provide dense shade. The middle terraces might have had fruit trees. Fig trees are hardy and produce abundant fruit. Pomegranates are symbolic and beautiful. Grapevines could have been trained on trellises. Olives, though challenging in the heat, might have been coaxed to grow with careful watering. The highest terraces, with full sun, would have had flowers and herbs. Roses brought from Persia would bloom in the heat. Jasmine would fill the air with fragrance at night. Herbs like thyme, mint, and coriander would provide scent and utility. Date palms would tower above everything, their fronds rustling in the wind. Botanical science also tells us what would not have grown. Certain plants need cold winters to flower. Tulips, for example, require a chilling period. They could not have been in the hanging gardens. Cherry blossoms, another plant often imagined in ancient gardens, need the climate of East Asia. They would die in Mesopotamian heat. Fantasy paintings sometimes show impossible combinations. Tropical orchids next to European roses, next to Arctic wildflowers. Real gardens have constraints, but within those constraints, enormous beauty is possible. A realistic hanging garden would have featured plants that could actually survive in Babylon's climate, with careful tending. It would have been impressive not because it had every plant in the world, but because it had many plants that should not have been able to grow there at all. Modern botanical gardens continue this tradition. They create microclimates where foreign plants can thrive. They use greenhouses, shade cloth, irrigation, and careful soil management. They study the needs of each species and meet those needs precisely. In this sense, every botanical garden in the world is a descendant of the hanging gardens. The techniques have improved, but the goal remains the same: make things grow where they do not belong. Prove that human knowledge can expand the boundaries of the possible. Every rose blooming in the desert, every palm swaying in a northern city, every orchid thriving far from its jungle home. These are echoes of that ancient dream. The dream that with enough water, enough care, enough love, any plant can grow anywhere. The hanging gardens whispered this truth, and science continues to prove it one seed at a time. Reaching the peaceful summit, we have climbed through 20 centuries of history. We have walked through archaeological sites and library archives. We have examined seeds and stars, clay tablets and stone channels. We have listened to scholars argue and poets dream. And now we stand at the summit of understanding. Not complete understanding, no, that may never be possible, but a peaceful place where questions and answers balance, where fact and legend hold hands, where we can see the hanging gardens whole, even if some details remain shadowed. From this height, the view is beautiful. Below us stretches all of human civilization. Behind us lies ancient Mesopotamia with its rivers and cities. Ahead lies our own time with its satellites and computers, and connecting them, an unbroken line of wonder. The hanging gardens, whether built by Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon or Sennacherib in Nineveh, represent the same achievement. They demonstrate that humans are not passive recipients of our environment. We are shapers. We look at desert and imagine green. We look at flat ground and imagine heights. We look at limitations and see possibilities. This is what separates us from other animals. Not just tool use or language, but imagination applied to the physical world. The ability to envision something that does not exist and then make it real. The gardens were this ability expressed in stone, water, and living plants. They were impossible made actual, and even if they have crumbled to dust, the fact that they once existed, even for a generation or two, proves that impossibility is just a temporary condition. The engineering required was extraordinary but achievable. Ancient cultures had the mathematics and surveying skills. They had hydraulic technology. They had construction techniques for massive structures. What they lacked in modern tools, they compensated for with time, labor, and patience. A project like the gardens might take decades to complete. Nebuchadnezzar ruled for 43 years. Sennacherib ruled for 24 years. either had time to complete such a project, they had wealth from conquest, they had tens of thousands of laborers, many of them slaves from defeated nations. With such resources, ambitious projects become feasible. The pyramids of Egypt, the Great Wall of China, Angkor Wat in Cambodia. All of these seemed impossible. All of them exist. The Hanging Gardens were in the same category. Difficult, yes. Expensive, absolutely. But possible. The love story at the heart of the legend matters. Whether Nebuchadnezzar truly built the gardens for his homesick wife Amytis, or whether this detail was added later by Romantic Greeks, the story endures because it resonates. We understand building something beautiful for someone we love. We understand the pain of homesickness. We understand the desire to give comfort. Every garden ever planted by a spouse for their partner. Every tree planted by a parent for a child. Every flower bed tended by lovers. These are all small versions of the Hanging Gardens. Love expressed through the slow work of making things grow. This is one of the purest forms of human devotion. Not just saying, "I love you" with words, but saying it with soil, water, patience, and years of care. The gardens, if built for love, teach us that monuments can be tender, that power can serve affection, that kings, too, can be gentle. From our summit, we can also see forward. The Hanging Gardens inspire us still. Architects dream of vertical forests. Engineers design self-watering systems. Botanists experiment with plants that can grow in harsh climates, hoping to green deserts and feed hungry populations. The gardens are a challenge passed down through history. They say, do better than we did. Build higher, grow more, make beauty where there was barrenness. Every green roof on a modern building accepts this challenge. Every urban farm, every community garden, every restoration of damaged ecosystems continues the work that began beside the Euphrates thousands of years ago. We are still building the Hanging Gardens. We always will be, because the project is never finished. Each generation must create beauty anew, must plant their own paradise, must tend their own small corner of earth with love and care. And so we pause here at the summit. We breathe deeply. The air is clear. The view stretches in all directions. We see the past and the future. We see what was and what might be. The Hanging Gardens are behind us, their exact location and form still debated. But their meaning is clear. They tell us that beauty is not a luxury, but a necessity. That nature and human design can collaborate. That love can move mountains, or at least build them from scratch. That water can be persuaded to flow upward if you care enough to engineer it properly. That every desert can bloom if given attention and resources. That wonder is not just found, but made. And that sometimes, late at night, when moonlight falls on ancient ruins or modern gardens, the boundary between past and present dissolves. The gardens bloom again in our minds, and we are standing in them, smelling jasmine, hearing fountains, feeling the peace that only beauty can bring. This is the summit. This is the moment of understanding. And it is enough. Nebuchadnezzar's gift of green. The king sat in his throne room. Outside, the city hummed with life. Merchants shouted prices. Donkeys brayed. Children played in dusty streets. But inside the palace, there was quiet. Nebuchadnezzar sat alone, thinking. His empire stretched from Egypt to Persia. His armies were the strongest in the world. His treasury overflowed with tribute from conquered nations. He had everything a man could want, except one thing. His wife was sad. Amytis, daughter of the Median king, had come to Babylon as part of a political alliance. The marriage joined two great kingdoms. It was good strategy, but Amytis was homesick. She missed the mountains of her homeland. She missed green hills and pine forests. She missed the sound of mountain streams. Babylon was flat, dusty, and hot. She tried to hide her sadness, but Nebuchadnezzar saw it in her eyes. He made a decision. If he could not bring his wife home to the mountains, he would bring the mountains to her. He called his architects and engineers. He described his vision. A garden, but not on the ground. A garden that rose in terraces, level upon level, like a green mountain built of stone and soil. He wanted trees so tall they could be seen from anywhere in the city. He wanted water flowing like mountain springs. He wanted cool shade and the smell of pine. He wanted his wife to walk through these gardens and feel, even for a moment, that she was home. The architects looked at each other doubtfully. Such a project would be expensive. It would require years of labor. It would demand engineering techniques never attempted before. But they knew better than to say no to the king. They bowed and said it would be done. The planning took months. Engineers calculated how much weight each terrace must bear. Stone columns were designed to support the platforms. Waterproofing was critical. If water seeped through the terraces, it would rot the wooden beams and collapse the structure. Layers of reed mats, bitumen and lead sheets were planned. Soil would be piled deep enough for tree roots. Botanists were consulted. Which plants could survive in Babylon's heat? Which trees would grow fast? Which flowers would bloom year-round? Lists were made. Orders were sent to distant provinces. Bring cedar saplings from Lebanon. Bring cypress from the northern mountains. Bring roses from Damascus. Bring every beautiful plant you can find. Money was no obstacle. The king had decreed it. The gardens would be built. Construction began. Thousands of laborers worked in shifts. Slaves captured in war provided most of the muscle. Stones were quarried and hauled to the site. Columns were raised. Platforms were built. Layer by layer, the garden took shape. It rose from the palace courtyard like a monument to determination. Masons carved channels for water. Metalworkers forged bronze parts for the pumps. Carpenters built the great wheels that would lift water from the Euphrates. It was a city within a city, a vertical world of stone and green. After years of work, the terraces were ready. Soil was carried up in baskets and spread thick. Then came the planting. Gardeners, experts brought from across the empire, supervised. Each tree was placed thoughtfully. Each flower bed was designed for color and fragrance. And then, finally, the water flowed. Pumps turned. Water climbed impossible heights. It filled reservoirs at the top. It cascaded down through channels. It fed every plant on every level. The desert had been conquered. Paradise had been built. Nebuchadnezzar led Ametis to the gardens. He did not announce it. He simply took her hand and walked with her through the palace. They climbed stairs. They passed through corridors. And then they stepped out onto the first terrace. Ametis gasped. Before her stretched a landscape she thought she would never see again. Trees rose on every side. Not palm trees, but pines and cedars and cypresses. Their needles were dark green and fragrant. Water splashed in fountains. It flowed in streams along carved channels. Birds sang. Real birds, not the crows and pigeons of the city, but songbirds from the mountains. The air was cool. The ground was covered with flowers. Roses, lilies, irises. Their scents mixed into something intoxicating. Ametis walked forward slowly, as if in a dream. She touched a cedar branch. She knelt beside a stream and let water run over her fingers. Tears filled her eyes. Nebuchadnezzar watched her. He said nothing. This moment was hers. She walked through the first terrace, then climbed to the second, then the third. At each level, she discovered new wonders. A pool reflecting the sky, a grove of fruit trees, a meadow of wildflowers. At the highest terrace, she stopped. She could see the whole city spread below. The Euphrates glittered in the distance. The Ishtar Gate gleamed blue and gold. The ziggurats reached toward heaven. But here, at this height, surrounded by green, she felt apart from it all. She felt at home. She turned to her husband. She could not speak. She did not need to. Her face said everything. He had given her what no conqueror can take and no wealth can buy. He had given her home. And in that moment, high above the desert, in a garden that should not exist, love was made visible. The gardens stood for 20 years, or perhaps 50, or perhaps a century. We do not know how long. But for as long as they stood, they were a testament to this truth. Beauty is built by love, watered by care, and it blooms in moonlight forever. Water's secret language. Water has a voice. It speaks in splashes and trickles. It murmurs over stone. It rushes through channels. In ancient Babylon, water spoke constantly. The Euphrates whispered as it flowed past the city. Canals murmured in the fields. Fountains in the palace courtyards sang. But the greatest water music came from the hanging gardens. There, water performed a symphony. It began deep underground, in wells dug to reach the river. Pumps lifted it upward with rhythmic creaks and splashes. It rose through shafts carved in stone. At each stage, it paused in reservoirs before continuing its climb. Then, at the summit, it overflowed. Down it came, level by level, falling, cascading, spreading. Each terrace received its share. Each plant drank its fill. And all the while, the water sang. This was not random. This was engineering as art. This was mathematics made music. The mathematics required to move water uphill is precise. Water is heavy. A cubic meter weighs 1,000 kilograms. Lifting this weight requires force. In ancient times, force came from human or animal muscles, sometimes aided by mechanical advantage. The shadoof used leverage. A long pole balanced on a fulcrum. On one end, a weight. On the other, a bucket. You pulled the weight down and the bucket rose. Simple but effective. The Archimedes screw used rotational force. Turn the screw and water climbed through the spiral. The chain pump used gears and continuous motion. Each method had advantages and limitations. The shadoof was simple but labor-intensive. The Archimedes screw worked well for moderate heights but required constant turning. The chain pump could lift water high but needed complex machinery and maintenance. The hanging gardens likely used multiple systems. Different heights required different solutions. The Persians contributed crucial technology, the Karnat. This was not a pump, but an underground channel. It brought water from distant mountains by gravity. The channel was dug at a very slight downward slope, perhaps 1 meter for every 1,000 meters of length. Maintaining this slope over miles required incredible surveying skill. Persian engineers used plumb bobs and water levels. They dug vertical shafts at intervals to provide access for maintenance and to remove excavated material. The Karnat system could deliver vast amounts of water without pumps. But in Babylon, where the gardens needed to be high above ground, Karnats could supply base water, which then had to be lifted to the terraces. This combination of gravity-fed supply and mechanical lifting was the key to the garden's irrigation. Waterproofing was another mathematical problem. Water seeps. It finds cracks. It erodes. Over time, water destroys almost everything. The garden terraces had to hold soil that was constantly watered. If water seeped through, it would weaken the structure from below. The solution was layers. First, the stone platform. Then, a layer of reed mats. Reeds are fibrous and water-resistant when woven tightly. On top of the reeds, bitumen, a tar-like substance that occurs naturally in Mesopotamia. Bitumen is waterproof and sticky. It seals gaps. On top of the bitumen, sheets of lead. Lead is soft and can be shaped to cover irregular surfaces. It is also completely waterproof. Finally, on top of the lead, a thick layer of soil. This 5-layer system kept water where it belonged, in the soil-nourishing plants, not leaking through to rot the structure. Each layer had to be installed perfectly. One mistake, and the entire terrace could fail. Drainage was equally important. Too much water is as bad as too little. Plants can drown if their roots stay waterlogged. Soil can become mud, too heavy for the structure to bear. So the gardens needed drainage channels. These ran along the edges of each terrace. Excess water flowed into these channels and down to the level below. Eventually, it reached the ground and was channeled away to fields or back to the river. The drainage system had to be calibrated carefully. Too much drainage, and plants would dry out. Too little, and they would rot. The ancient engineers got it right. They understood that water must be controlled, but also allowed to flow naturally. This balance is the secret language of water. Listen to it, respect it, work with it rather than against it. Give it paths and it will obey. Try to trap it completely and it will find a way to escape, often destructively. Modern engineers study ancient hydraulics with admiration. The principles used in the Hanging Gardens are still valid. Waterproofing, drainage, efficient lifting, these are challenges we still face. When we build green roofs on skyscrapers, we use modern materials but ancient concepts. Waterproof membranes protect the building. Drainage layers prevent water accumulation. Irrigation systems deliver water precisely where needed. We have pumps powered by electricity instead of muscle, but the physics are the same. Water must go up, water must be distributed, water must drain. The Hanging Gardens solved these problems 2,600 years ago. Their solutions were so effective that echoes of them appear in every vertical garden built today. The water in those ancient fountains spoke a language we still understand. It said, with knowledge and care, the impossible becomes routine. With precision and patience, rivers can be made to flow upward. And when they do, beauty blooms in unexpected places. That is the secret language of water, and the gardens were fluent in it. The 7 terraces of sleep. Imagine 7 steps to heaven, not metaphorical steps, but physical terraces rising one above another. Each terrace is a world unto itself. Each has its own character, its own purpose. The first terrace is the largest, the foundation. Here grow the tallest trees. Palms stretch toward the sky, their fronds rustling in the warm wind. The second terrace is slightly smaller, set back from the first. Here grow fruit trees, figs, pomegranates, olives. Their branches provide shade for those walking below. The third terrace grows vines. Grapes hang in clusters. They will be harvested and made into wine. The fourth terrace is a flower garden. Roses in reds and whites. Lilies with heavy, sweet scent. The fifth terrace has herbs, mint, thyme, coriander. Their fragrance fills the air. The sixth terrace is a meadow. Grass and wildflowers sway in the breeze. And the seventh, the highest, is a reflecting pool. Perfectly still water mirrors the sky. To climb these terraces is to climb from earth to heaven, to move through increasing refinement, from the practical to the beautiful to the transcendent. Each terrace had to support enormous weight. Soil, fully watered, is heavy. A cubic meter weighs about 2,000 kilograms when saturated. The largest terraces might hold hundreds of cubic meters of soil, plus the weight of trees, water, and stone. That is millions of kilograms. The supporting structure had to be incredibly strong. Ancient engineers used stone and fired brick. They built thick walls and massive columns. They created vaulted chambers underneath the terraces. Vaults are arches extended in depth. They distribute weight efficiently. The weight pushes down and outward, but the vault's shape directs those forces into the supporting walls. Roman engineers later perfected this technique, but the Babylonians understood it too. Their temples and palaces used vaulting extensively. The Hanging Gardens would have pushed this technique to its limits. The thickness of support walls can be calculated. We know from ancient texts approximately how high the gardens were. Sources mention heights between 75 and 100 feet, about the height of a 7 to 10-story building. We know the gardens covered several thousand square meters. With these dimensions, engineers can estimate the necessary wall thickness. The walls probably ranged from 6 to 12 feet thick. This seems excessive until you remember what they were supporting. Millions of kilograms pressing down year after year, roots pushing into cracks, water freezing and expanding in winter, earthquakes shaking the foundation. The walls had to withstand all of this for decades. Over-engineering was not wasteful, it was necessary. And the Babylonians had plenty of bricks. Their city was built from them. Bricks were cheap and reliable, so they built thick and built well. Stairs connected the terraces. These stairs were not narrow or steep. They were wide enough for multiple people to walk side by side. They were gentle in slope, so that carrying water or soil would not be too exhausting. Some accounts mention ramps instead of stairs. Ramps would allow carts to be wheeled up, useful for transporting heavy materials. Whether stairs or ramps, the pathways were an important design feature. They determined how people experienced the gardens. A winding stair would create mystery. You could not see the next terrace until you climbed. A straight ramp would create anticipation. You could see your goal from the start. Either way, the ascent was part of the experience. Climbing was symbolic. Each step took you higher, closer to divinity, further from the noise and dust of the city below. The distribution of plants was not random. Gardeners, in ancient times, understood microclimates. They knew that the top of a hill is windier and sunnier than the bottom. They knew that lower terraces, shaded by the terraces above, stay cooler and moister. They placed plants accordingly. Sun-loving species on top, shade-tolerant species below. This is practical, but also aesthetic. The gardens would have appeared lightest and brightest at the summit, darker and lusher at the base, like a natural hillside. This is part of the genius. The gardens did not look artificial. They looked like a mountain that happened to grow in the middle of a city. Visitors would approach, see this impossible green hill, and wonder if the gods had put it there. Only on closer inspection would the stone terraces, the channels, the pumps become visible. And by then, the magic had already worked. The sense of wonder was established. At night, the gardens transformed. Torches were lit along the pathways. Their flickering light made shadows dance among the trees. Water reflected the flames, doubling their brightness. The sound of water grew louder in the quiet night. During the day, the city's noise masked it. At night, it became music. Fountains splashed, streams murmured. The wind in the leaves added its voice. And above, the moon and stars looked down. Perhaps this is when the gardens were most beautiful, most magical. In moonlight, colours faded to silver and shadow. Forms became mysterious. A person walking the terraces at night would feel transported, would feel as if they had stepped into a dream. This is why we call them the Gardens of Moonlight, because that is when they whispered their deepest secrets. When the world slept, the gardens spoke. They spoke of love that builds mountains, of hope that waters deserts, of beauty that endures when everything else crumbles. These are the 7 terraces of sleep, and they sleep still somewhere beneath the sand, waiting to be rediscovered. Voices preserved in clay forever. The past speaks to us through fragments, broken pottery, worn coins, carved stones. But the clearest voice comes from clay tablets. Thousands of them have been found in Mesopotamia. They were used for everything: shopping lists, legal contracts, letters between lovers, royal decrees, mathematical exercises, stories of gods and heroes, all pressed into soft clay with a wedge-shaped stylus, then baked hard by the sun or accidentally by fire when buildings burned. These tablets are immortal in a way that paper is not. Paper rots, parchment crumbles, but clay endures. It can lie buried for 3,000 years and still be readable. This is humanity's great fortune. The Babylonians chose the perfect medium for their writing, and so their voices reach us clear across the millennia. Nebuchadnezzar left many inscriptions. He was proud of his accomplishments and wanted them recorded. Tablets and stone monuments list his building project. I, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, restorer of Esagila and Ezida, son of Nabopolassar, king of Babylon. Thus begins many of his texts. He describes rebuilding city walls. He describes constructing the Ishtar Gate. He describes renovating temples dedicated to Marduk and Nabu. He lists the materials used: cedar from Lebanon, gold from Egypt, lapis lazuli from distant mountains. He describes the laborers, skilled craftsmen from conquered nations. These inscriptions are detailed and specific. They tell us he was a builder king, not just a warrior. But strangely, he never explicitly mentions the Hanging Gardens, not by that name. This silence is the great puzzle. Why would he omit such a spectacular achievement? One possibility is that we are looking for the wrong words. The Greeks called them Hanging Gardens. But Nebuchadnezzar would not have used Greek. He wrote in Akkadian. And in Akkadian, there might not have been a specific term for hanging or elevated gardens. He might have called them simply the palace gardens, or the terraced gardens, or the mountain garden. One partially damaged tablet mentions a structure with raised terraces and exotic trees. Could this be a reference to the gardens? Scholars debate it. The tablet is broken. Key words are missing. We can only guess at the full text. Another tablet describes delivering cedar logs to the palace for a construction project involving levels and water engineering. Again, this might refer to the gardens, or it might refer to something else entirely. The evidence is tantalizing but not conclusive. Sennacherib of Assyria, whose gardens in Nineveh might be the actual hanging gardens, left clearer inscription. One text says, "I raised therein high above a swamp of a park resembling the mountains." He describes planting trees from many lands. He describes creating an irrigation system using bronze screws to lift water. He says visitors from distant lands came to marvel at his creation. This sounds very much like the Greek descriptions of the Hanging Gardens. The language is different, but the concept is identical. If Dali is correct and these are the gardens later attributed to Babylon, then we do have a contemporary source. We have the voice of the actual creator telling us, in his own words, what he built and why. Beyond royal inscriptions, there are administrative tablets. These recorded daily palace operations, deliveries of food, payments to workers, inventories of materials. One tablet lists payment to gardeners for maintaining the upper gardens. Another records the delivery of trees from the north to the palace. These mundane records provide glimpses of garden maintenance. Someone had to tend those plants. Someone had to repair the pumps. Someone had to prune the trees and harvest the fruit. These someones were probably slaves or low-paid workers. They did not leave inscriptions praising themselves, but the records of their wages and supplies tell us they existed. They tell us that gardens, whether the famous Hanging Gardens or other palace gardens, were real and required constant care. Voices in clay, some loud and proud, like Nebuchadnezzar boasting of his walls. Some quiet and practical, like the clerk recording 3 bushels of grain for the gardeners. Some broken and ambiguous, like the damaged tablet that might or might not mention elevated terraces. All of them together create a chorus. They sing of a civilization that valued beauty, that had the wealth and knowledge to create wonders, that wrote everything down, preserving for us a window into their world. When we hold a clay tablet in our hands, we are touching what a Babylonian touched. When we read the wedge-shaped marks, we are hearing what a Babylonian said. The voice is faint, distorted by time and translation, but it is real, and it whispers across 3,000 years. We were here, we built, we planted, we made the desert bloom. Remember us. And tonight, in moonlight, we do remember. We hear the voices, and we answer, yes, we remember. You are not forgotten. Where desert meets dream, close your eyes and walk with me. We are standing at the base of the gardens. Above us rise 7 terraces, each smaller than the one below, creating a stepped pyramid of green. The first thing you notice is coolness. The air here is 10 degrees cooler than the city streets. Moisture from the plants and fountains has created a microclimate. Take a breath. The air smells of jasmine and wet stone. There is a hint of cedar, sharp and clean. And underneath, the earthy smell of soil, rich and alive. This is not desert air. This is forest air, mountain air, transplanted to Babylon by human will. Start climbing the first set of stairs. They are wide and shallow, carved from limestone. Each step is worn smooth by thousands of feet over many years. Your hand brushes the wall as you climb. It is cool stone, slightly damp. Moss grows in the cracks. You pass the first terrace and see date palms towering overhead. Their fronds rustle in a breeze that does not reach the ground. Between the palms, smaller trees grow, fig and pomegranate. Their branches are heavy with fruit. You could reach up and pluck a ripe fig. Its skin is soft, slightly split, oozing sweet juice. This is not just decoration. This is a working orchard. The gardens feed the palace. Beauty and utility combined. Continue to the second terrace. Here, the light changes. The trees above cast dappled shadows. The path curves, following the terrace's edge. You see a channel of water running beside the path. It is about a foot wide, carved from stone, lined with smooth pebbles. The water is clear and cold. It flows steadily, making a gentle murmur. Fish dart in the water, tiny silver flashes. How did fish get here? Someone carried them up, perhaps as eggs, and released them in the channels. Now they live in this elevated stream, far above the Euphrates. Bend down and touch the water. It shocks your hand with its coldness. Where does such cold water come from in this desert? From deep wells that tap into underground aquifers. From the snowmelt of distant mountains channeled here through quanats. This water has travelled far to be here, and it is precious. The third terrace opens into a plaza. In the centre is a fountain. Water jets from the mouth of a bronze lion. It arcs through the air, catching sunlight, and falls into a circular pool. The sound is soothing, constant. Around the pool, stone benches invite you to sit. Imagine sitting here in the afternoon. The sun is hot, but the fountain's spray cools the air. You watch the water play. You listen to its endless song. Time slows. The worries of the city fade. This is what the gardens offer: respite, a place to escape, not just physically, but mentally and spiritually. Here, the rhythms are natural. Water falls, leaves rustle, birds sing. There are no demands, no politics, no war, just beauty and peace. Climb higher. The fourth and fifth terraces are flower gardens. Roses bloom in profusion. Reds, whites, pinks. Their scent is almost overwhelming. Bees drone among the blossoms, heavy with pollen. Butterflies flutter past, wings bright in the sun. Someone has cultivated these gardens with extraordinary care. Every plant is healthy. No weeds intrude. The soil is rich and dark. You can see irrigation channels running between the flower beds, ensuring each plant gets exactly the water it needs. This level of care requires knowledge and labour. An army of gardeners works here, invisible but essential. They prune, water, fertilise and watch. They remove dead flowers and plant new ones. They battle pests and diseases. The gardens look effortless, but that is an illusion. Behind the beauty is relentless work. The sixth terrace is quiet. It is a meadow of grass and wildflowers. The grass is soft under your feet. You could lie down here and watch clouds. Perhaps that is the intention. After the sensory richness of the lower levels, this terrace offers simplicity. Just sky and grass and the distant sound of water. And then the final climb. The 7th terrace. The summit. Here is the reflecting pool. It is perfectly rectangular, lined with white stone. The water is so still, it looks like glass. The sky reflects perfectly. You see clouds drifting. You see a bird flying. You see yourself looking down. This is a mirror between earth and heaven. And standing here, at the highest point, you feel lifted. Not just physically, but spiritually. The city is far below. The sky is close above. And you are suspended between, in a garden that should not exist, breathing air cooled by impossible greenery, hearing water that defied gravity. This is where desert meets dream, and for this moment, the dream is real. Closing with soft answers and one last question. What do we know for certain? We know that ancient writers described gardens in Mesopotamia that amazed them. Gardens built on terraces, irrigated by clever engineering, planted with exotic trees. We know that such gardens were possible with the technology available at the time. We know that Babylon and Nineveh were wealthy enough to fund such projects. We know that kings like Nebuchadnezzar and Sennacherib were ambitious builders who left inscriptions boasting of their accomplishments. We know that the climate, while harsh, could support a wide variety of plants with proper irrigation. We know that similar terraced gardens existed elsewhere in the ancient world. All of this adds up to probability. The hanging gardens, in some form, almost certainly existed. Perhaps not exactly as the Greeks described them, perhaps somewhat smaller, somewhat less spectacular, but real nonetheless. This is our soft answer. Not absolute certainty, but strong confidence. What remains uncertain? We do not know the exact location. Babylon is the traditional site, but Nineveh is now a serious candidate. We do not know the precise dimensions or design. The ancient accounts vary and contradict each other. We do not know how long the gardens survived, decades, centuries. We do not know when or how they were destroyed. Did they collapse in an earthquake? Were they abandoned when the irrigation system failed? Did Alexander's successors dismantle them for building materials? We do not know. We have no Babylonian texts that definitively describe them. We have no archaeological remains that can be positively identified as the gardens. This absence is frustrating, but it is also strangely fitting. Some mysteries are better left partly unsolved. Some wonders shine brighter in the imagination than they ever could in full daylight. Why does uncertainty enrich rather than diminish? Because it invites us to participate. If we knew everything, we would passively receive information. But uncertainty requires us to imagine, to speculate, to dream. Every person who hears about the hanging gardens creates their own version in their mind. Your gardens are unique to you. Mine are unique to me. Together, all of our imagined gardens form a collective vision, far richer than any single historical reality. The gardens become not just an artifact, but a living tradition. Each generation reimagines them. Each culture interprets them through its own values. This process is itself creative. It is humanity continuing the work of the original builders. They built gardens in stone and soil. We build them in thought and art. Both are real. Both matter. What is the value of seeking without finding? The search itself teaches us. In trying to understand the hanging gardens, we have learned about ancient engineering, botany, archaeology, linguistics, and more. We have developed new technologies for studying the past. We have trained new generations of scholars. We have connected with people across time and space who share our sense of wonder. The search has made us better. It has expanded our knowledge and our imagination. If tomorrow someone found definitive proof of the garden's exact location and design, that would be wonderful. But even without such proof, the search has already justified itself. The journey matters as much as the destination, perhaps more. What have we learned on this journey tonight? We have learned that love can inspire monuments. That beauty is worth pursuing even at great cost. That human beings are capable of astonishing creativity. That ancient people were not primitive, but sophisticated, knowledgeable, and ambitious. That civilizations rise and fall, but their best achievements echo forever. That nature and culture can collaborate to create something greater than either alone. That water can be made to flow upward if you care enough to engineer it. That seeds planted thousands of years ago can still bloom in our minds. That mystery and knowledge are not opposites, but partners. That the past is not dead, but alive, waiting for us to listen. These are not small lessons. These are truths that can shape how we live today. What question remains? Here it is, gentle and persistent. What will you build? You may never construct a wonder of the world, but you can plant a garden. You can create beauty in your small corner of existence. You can bring water to dry places, metaphorically or literally. You can tend growing things with patience and love. You can make your environment better than you found it. The hanging gardens whisper this challenge across the centuries. They ask, will you add to beauty or subtract from it? Will you create or merely consume? Will you try the impossible or accept only the easy? Every flower you plant is a small echo of those ancient terraces. Every kindness you offer is water flowing upward against gravity. Every moment you spend creating something beautiful is a terrace added to the garden of human culture. The gardens are gone, but their spirit remains, and it waits in you. What will you build? What will you plant? What impossible thing will you attempt in the moonlight? The desert is always there, waiting, and so is the dream of making it bloom. Take a deep breath, hold this wonder close. If this journey brought you peace, share it with someone who needs gentle rest. Subscribe to walk with us again through history's quiet mysteries. History waits in the moonlight, patient and eternal. It whispers your name softly. We will be here, telling stories whenever you need to dream again. And so we leave Babylon's gardens. Perhaps they grew by the Euphrates under Nebuchadnezzar's watchful eye. Perhaps they bloomed in Nineveh under Sennacherib's proud gaze. Perhaps they lived only in words and wishes carried from traveller to traveller until they became legend. But tonight, they bloomed again in your mind. That is their deepest magic. History is not just what happened, it is what we remember, what we carry forward into tomorrow, what helps us sleep when the world feels too loud and too harsh. You have walked through ancient gates tonight. You have touched mystery with your imagination. You have rested in the shadows of hanging vines and moonlit terraces, breathing the air of 3,000 years ago. The gardens may be dust now, scattered by desert wind, but the wonder, that lives in you. It took root as you listened. It will grow as you remember. Sleep well, dear traveller. May your dreams be filled with rivers that flow upward, stars that spell out secrets, and flowers that bloom in impossible places. Until we meet again in history's gentle embrace, good night. The moonlight stays with you. The gardens whisper on.